I'm Talia, and I've spent most of my 29 years being the wrong kind of daughter. Not the rebellious kind, not the troubled kind, just the kind nobody noticed. My brother, 3 years older, 6 feet tall, charming in that effortless way that made strangers trust him within minutes, was the kind of person my parents built their stories around. The kind they called first with good news, the kind they bragged about at church potlucks and neighborhood cookouts. He'd gotten into real estate development at 24, started flipping commercial properties around Columbus, Ohio. And by the time he was 30, he had a business card that said principal on it. My mother kept a copy in her wallet. I'm not joking. Me? I was a freelance brand designer. I built logos, created marketing campaigns, crafted visual identities for small businesses. I was good at it, better than most people knew, because I didn't have my mother carrying my resume around. I had clients from Cincinnati to Pittsburgh, referrals that came in quietly, a reputation I'd built on actual work. But at the dinner table in Columbus, what I did was just computer stuff. What my brother did was big things. I'd learned to live with that. What I hadn't learned, not until it was almost too late, was what it cost me. 2 years ago, I was on the edge of the biggest contract of my career. A regional grocery chain out of Indianapolis had reached out. They wanted a full brand overhaul, new visual identity, packaging redesign, digital campaigns strategy. The contract was worth $47,000, spread over 8 months. I'd spent 3 weeks putting together the proposal. I'd barely slept. When they sent back the letter of intent, I remember sitting in my apartment staring at it, thinking, this is it. This is the thing that changes everything. That week, my mother called. She didn't start with hello or how are you. She started with Talia, we're in trouble. My parents' catering business, they'd run it out of Columbus for 11 years, was going under. They'd taken on too many events, lost 2 big corporate clients to a larger company, and fallen behind on equipment leases and supplier invoices. They were 4 months behind on payments. Their credit was maxed. They had enough cash to keep the lights on for maybe 6 more weeks. I asked where my brother was in all of this. My mother said he was dealing with some projects of his own and couldn't get involved right now. I didn't fight it, I should have, but I didn't. I called Indianapolis and told them I needed to delay the project start. They said they'd move on to their second choice. The $47,000 walked out the door before I'd ever touched it. Instead, I drove to Columbus. I sat down with my parents' invoices, their vendor contracts, their booking calendar. I spent 2 weeks redesigning their entire brand, new logo, new menu layouts, a website that didn't look like it was built in 2009. I called every local venue coordinator and event planner I could find, introduced myself, dropped off sample menus with the new branding. I set up their Google business profile, ran a small targeted ad campaign on a $600 budget, photographed their food at 3 events. I negotiated a payment plan with their equipment lease company and talked one of their key suppliers into extending terms by 90 days. Within 5 months, the business was stabilized. 12 new event bookings, positive cash flow. My father told me on the phone one evening that I'd really helped out. My mother sent me a fruit basket. Then they held a family meeting. I drove back to Columbus expecting something. Acknowledgement, maybe. My father sat at the head of the table with a folder in front of him, looking very official, and announced that they'd decided to restructure the business, bring in someone to take it to the next level. That someone, he said, was my brother. My brother, who had been dealing with projects, while I spent 5 months rebuilding what my parents had let fall apart. Who sat across from me at that table with his hands folded, nodding like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. My mother smiled. He understands the business side, she said. He's been reading up on the catering industry. My brother glanced at me. You did good, Tal, he said, in the same tone you'd use to compliment a kid who set the table without being asked. My best friend Penny, who I'd known since freshman year at Ohio State, told me plainly, over coffee at her kitchen table, that I was fooling myself. They used you, she said, and now they've handed the thing you built to your brother. I smiled and said I was fine. She looked at me like she knew better. I kept coming back to Columbus anyway, helped with accounting, stayed involved, told myself that eventually they'd see what I'd contributed. Then my brother got engaged. His fiancée was a woman named Camille, Sharp, pretty, from a well-off family in Westerville. The engagement announcement came with a dinner out champagne, the whole production. My parents glowed. My mother cried. I sat next to them and smiled until my face hurt. A week later, my mother called. "We want you to handle the wedding planning," she said. "You're so organized. You'll do a beautiful job." She didn't ask if I had time. She didn't mention a budget. She didn't say anything about who would be contributing financially. She just said, "We're thinking next August," and started describing the kind of event she had in mind. A venue in downtown Columbus, seated dinner for a 150, a live band, floral arrangements, the full picture. I made a critical mistake. I said yes. I told myself it was my chance to do something they'd actually remember. I'd already lost the $47,000 contract. I'd already watched them hand the business to my brother. But maybe if I pulled off something genuinely beautiful, they'd finally look at me the way they looked at him. I started calling vendors. I found a venue, a gorgeous old ballroom space downtown, $4,800 for the day. I booked a caterer, negotiated a menu of roasted chicken, salmon, seasonal sides. I found photographer recommended by 3 different couples, a local band that played jazz and Motown covers for a reasonable rate. Every deposit came out of my savings. My parents contributed $5,000. Camille's parents sent $3,000. My brother said he'd cover the rest once invoices came in. By the time I'd put down all the deposits, I'd spent $9,200 of my own money. My brother hadn't covered anything. He kept adding things. First, it was upgraded centerpieces. He'd seen something on Instagram, tall floral columns with white roses and trailing greenery. The florist quoted an additional $400. I called my brother. He said, "Figure it out." I emailed him the invoice. He left it on red. Then Camille wanted a specialty dessert bar, artisan macarons and custom wedding cake tiers from a boutique bakery in Dublin, Ohio. Another $900. I asked my brother to handle it directly. He forwarded the email back to me with a note that said, "Can you just deal with this?" I started calling Penny every other day. She'd listen, then say the same thing each time. Walk away. I kept saying I was almost done. Just get through the wedding. 3 weeks before the date, at a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, my brother leaned back from the table and announced he wanted to upgrade the bar package. The venue offered a standard open bar, but he'd heard about a craft cocktail service out of Cincinnati. Specialty drinks, custom menu, a whole experience. The quote was $3,800, on top of everything I'd already paid. I set my fork down. "I don't have that money," I said. "I've already put in over $9,000 of my own savings." My mother looked up from her plate. "It's one package, Talia." "It's nearly $4,000, I said. "I've funded most of this wedding. I need Aaron and Camille's families to step in at this point." My brother exchanged a look with Camille. My father cleared his throat. "We just want the day to be special," my mother said, like I'd suggested cutting the flowers entirely. "I want it to be special too," I said. "That's why I've spent $9,000. But I'm at my limit." My brother's voice went flat. "You're making this about money when it's about family." "It is about money," I said. "That's exactly what it's about." My father set down his napkin. "You're embarrassing us in front of Camille." Camille stared at the tablecloth. My mother folded her hands and looked at me with an expression I'd seen my whole life. The one that said I was the problem, the complication, the one who made everything harder. And then she said it. "Talia, honestly, Aaron's wedding day would be so much more beautiful without you there to ruin it. Do everyone a favor and just stay home." The room went still. My father didn't flinch. My brother poured himself more wine. Camille finally looked up, but she didn't say anything. Nobody did. I picked up my purse. "Okay," I said. Just that one word. I walked out of that house, got in my car, and sat in the driveway for 4 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. The street was quiet. The lights in the house were warm through the windows. I stared at them and thought about every deposit slip, every vendor email. Every weekend I'd driven to Columbus to help with something they could have figured out themselves. Every time I'd swallowed the hurt and smiled and told myself that eventually they'd notice. They'd noticed exactly what I was. The next morning I started making phone calls. The florist first. I explained I needed to cancel the order. per the contract, and I'd read every contract carefully when I signed them, specifically because I'd been doing all of this without any backup. Cancellations more than 21 days out were eligible for a partial refund. She was professional about it. I got half my deposit back. I moved through the list. The photographer, the specialty caterer, the jazz band, the linen rental company. Some had stricter terms. By noon, I'd recovered about $5,400 of what I'd put in. The craft cocktail service from Cincinnati, the one my brother had demanded, I'd never booked in the first place. By noon, my brother's wedding had no food, no flowers, no live music, and no photographer. I drove back to my apartment in Columbus, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Quiet, not the quiet of suppression, the quiet of a decision made cleanly. The wedding day came. Guests arrived at the venue to bare tables. The staff had nothing to offer them. Camille stood near the entrance in her gown, her mother beside her, both of them on their phones. My brother was red-faced and loud, demanding explanations from coordinators who had no idea what had happened. My parents called me twice. I didn't answer. That evening, my brother posted in a Columbus neighborhood community Facebook group, one of those forums where everyone knows everyone's business. He wrote that his sister had sabotaged his wedding out of jealousy, that she'd been trusted with planning and had deliberately destroyed the day. He named me. He tagged the post to the neighborhood where my parents lived. Comments piled up from people I'd known for years. A few called me spiteful. Someone who didn't know me at all called me unhinged. My mother replied to my brother's post. "She's always been like this," she wrote. 2 sentences. That was all she added. That was enough. Penny called me that night. She'd seen everything. She was furious on my behalf, ready to write a rebuttal. I told her not to bother. "They're lying about what happened," she said. "I know," I said. "And they'll keep lying no matter what I put out there. This isn't a fight I can win publicly." She was quiet for a moment. "So what are you going to do?" I'd been looking at apartment listings in Bozeman, Montana for the past 2 hours. I spent the next 2 weeks in motion. A Columbus design agency had made a passing offer for my client list 3 months earlier. Nothing serious at the time, just a casual mention over coffee. I called them back and said I was ready to negotiate. We settled on $22,000 for my client contracts and referral files. I signed the papers. Then I called the bank. The year before, when my parents were stabilizing the catering business, I'd quietly put $4,000 of my own money into a small equipment fund I managed for them. Replacement parts for commercial refrigeration units, a backup generator for events. It had never been formally documented as a loan. I told the bank to remove my authorization from the shared business account I'd helped set up. I stopped all automatic transfers I'd been running. I sent my parents a letter, certified mail, informing them I was withdrawing all financial support from the business effective immediately. I didn't call. I didn't explain. They'd told me to stay home. I took them at their word. I loaded 2 suitcases into my car on a Tuesday morning in September, drove to a shipping center to send 3 boxes ahead of me, and started the 18-hour drive west. I texted Penny my new address and told her I'd call when I got settled. Somewhere in Nebraska, just after dark, I pulled over at a rest stop and sat with the engine running. The sky was unbelievably wide. I hadn't paid attention to the sky in years, not consciously anyway. I sat there for 10 minutes just looking at it, then I kept driving. Bozeman in September was different from anything I'd known. The air smelled like pine and distance. My apartment was on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian near downtown, small but full of light, with a view of the Bridger Mountains to the east. The first morning, I made coffee and stood at the window for a long time. I started freelancing immediately. Bozeman had a growing economy built around tourism, outdoor recreation brands, and an influx of remote workers and small businesses that needed real design work. Within 3 weeks, I had my first client, a small outfitter company that led fly fishing and backcountry hiking tours. They needed a complete rebrand. I built them one. Penny texted me updates from Columbus. The catering business had started showing cracks within weeks of my withdrawal. 2 of my parents' regular corporate clients had been managed through contact relationships I'd cultivated. When I left, those relationships lapsed. My brother had stepped back from any real involvement in the business once the social media drama faded. It turned out reading up on the catering industry meant approximately nothing in practice. By November, Penny sent me a screenshot. The business had posted a notice on their Facebook page, temporarily closing for operational restructuring. 2 months later, the page went dark entirely. She also told me that my brother and Camille's wedding had eventually happened. Quietly rescheduled, 30 people, simple venue, no band, no specialty cocktails. I thought about how I'd spent 9 months and $9,000 building something elaborate for a day that ended up happening on a shoestring with 30 guests. It was almost funny. Almost. I met Angie at a coffee shop downtown in October. She was sitting at the table next to mine in the way Bozeman coffee shops work. Close quarters, strangers unavoidable, and she noticed the logo I was sketching on my notebook and asked what I was working on. She was in her late 40s, owned a small pottery studio a few blocks away, had built it from scratch after relocating from Chicago a decade ago. We talked for 2 hours. She had a directness I hadn't encountered much in Columbus. The kind that comes from someone who'd already done the hard work of figuring out what mattered to them. When I told her a little of why I'd moved, she didn't offer sympathy or advice. She just said, "Good, you're in the right place." She introduced me to people. A brewery owner who needed label design. A boutique hotel that was rebranding. A nonprofit focused on trail conservation that needed help building donor communications. By January, I had 6 active clients and more inquiries coming in than I could take on alone. I turned down 2 projects. I had never turned down work before in my life. In December, a letter arrived from my mother. She'd tracked down my Bozeman address somehow. Penny called me immediately, feeling guilty about it. The letter said my mother had been having health issues, some tests her doctor had ordered. She wrote that she needed me to come home, that things weren't going well. That family was supposed to support each other. She wrote that I'd overreacted to a stressful evening and that she hoped I could find it in my heart to let go of whatever grudge I was carrying. I read it twice at my kitchen table, then I called Angie. She listened to me read the whole thing out loud. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. She didn't apologize, Angie said. No, I said. She didn't acknowledge what she said to you. No. Then it's not a repair attempt, she said. It's a recruitment attempt. She was right. I'd seen the move before. The health scare deployed like a tool, designed to make me feel responsible for whatever came next. My mother had always been skilled at positioning her needs as my obligations. I wrote back. 1 paragraph, typed, printed, mailed in an envelope with no return address. I told her I wished her good health and I hoped she found the support she needed. I told her I wouldn't be coming back to Columbus. I told her I'd made a life elsewhere, that I was well, and that I wished the same for her. I didn't mention my brother. I didn't mention the wedding. I didn't mention the $9,000. I sealed it and walked to the mailbox on the corner in the cold Montana air, and I stood there for a minute after I dropped it in, not grieving, exactly. Like a door I'd been standing in the frame of for years had finally swung shut and I was on the right side of it. Penny came to visit in February. She stayed for a long weekend, and we hiked up toward Pete's Hill, on a day when the temperature was 12 degrees and the snow on the peaks looked like it had been painted on. She said I seemed different. Lighter, she said. I'm not carrying anything that isn't mine, I said. By spring I'd landed a 6-month contract with the Bozeman Convention and Visitors Bureau, a regional tourism campaign that covered print collateral, social strategy, and digital assets. It was the kind of work I'd always been capable of, but hadn't been given room to pursue. Because I'd spent so much of my energy rebuilding things for other people. Things they eventually handed to someone else. Some evenings I'd sit at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and think about all of it. Not obsessively. Just the way you think about a scar sometimes. I'd think about my brother at that dinner table, pouring his wine while my mother told me to stay home. I'd think about my father's silence, which said more than he probably intended. I'd think about the 11 years my parents ran that business, and the 5 months I spent saving it, and the way "you did good" sounded coming from my brother's mouth. I used to believe the point was to make them understand that if I just did enough, gave enough, stayed patient enough, they'd eventually see me. Now I knew that was never how it was going to go. The way they saw me was built into something older than anything I could fix, with a wedding or a marketing campaign or a certified letter. And the moment I stopped trying to change that equation was the moment I became unavailable for it. One afternoon in April, I walked out the front door of my apartment building, and the mountains were doing the thing they do in spring. The light coming in low and gold, the snow on the peaks turned bright as glass. A woman from my hiking group waved from across the street. My calendar had 3 client calls and a design review. There was money in my bank account. There was nothing I owed anyone that I hadn't chosen to give. That was the thing I'd been missing in Columbus through all of it, the choosing. I'd been so locked into trying to earn something that was never actually on offer that I'd forgotten what it felt like to act from my own life, not from what I thought they needed from me. I'm not going to tell you I stopped missing my family entirely. That would be a different kind of lie. I missed the idea of them. The parents I'd wished they were, the brother I'd wanted to have. But wishing for what something could have been is different from staying in what it actually was. I'd finally learned to tell the difference. And standing on that sidewalk in the April light, with the mountains at my back, and a client call in 20 minutes, and a whole city still becoming familiar, I understood something I should have understood years earlier. My worth was never something they had the power to confirm. It was always just mine. I'd just spent too long waiting for permission to live like I believed that.